Okay, so a fraction has a numerator of 3 and a denominator of 10. To convert this to a decimal, this is your denominator, and that is going to tell you so this is the tenths, this is the hundredths, this is the thousandths, this is the 10,000ths, and this is the 100,000ths. So what this means is if you had this or you had this, they mean the same thing. This is basically 3/10, and what you would do is take the numerator and that would end on the tenths place. Now if you had 3/100ths, you would take your decimal and the 3 would end on the hundredths place, and whatever comes before the decimal you fill in with a 0. And then if it was 3/1000, you would put the 3 on the thousandths place, and then you'd fill in what was before with zeros. Now to change these all to a percent, you move 2 to the right, 1, 2, and you put a percent. Now there's nothing here, so we have to fill it in with a 0. So 3/10 is 0.3, and it's also 30%.
Okay.
So if you were to graph that out on a tens block, you would have a block of 10, and you would take 3 of them. If you had 100 block that they wanted you to do, pretend like that's 100. You would change the denominator to 100, and then we know we can't just change a 10 to a 100, so I would have to multiply it by 10, and anything I do to the denominator I do to the numerator, and then I'd fill in 30 squares of my 100 block. Okay, let's look at this one. 3/100, we can change this to a percent by moving 2 to the right, and it becomes 3%. And then check this out, Lauren. This one, we still move 2 to the right, and it becomes 0.3%. That is a thing. You can have a decimal and a percent. This is actually a real number.
It is?
Mm-hmm. So you just do the same exact thing no matter what. So even if this looks crazy, if you move 2 to the right and you have a decimal, you will always get the right answer. So suppose you had 256.256. You would move 2 to the right, and the percent would be 25.6%. That is a true thing. That is something that we can totally 100% do. You always just follow this technique. Now, to change our percent to a decimal, we would do the opposite. So suppose I had 36%, 3%, 3.26%, 380%, 3,536%. We do the same exact thing. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to get rid of the percent, you're going to change it to a decimal, and you're going to go 2 to the left. So 36% equals 0.36. 3%, you would change this to a decimal and go, there's no such thing as, this is what you do for everything. So there's no such thing as a wrong number. Any number is valid. Something could be 1,000,000%, right? It just, whatever it is, you're going to do the same exact thing with, even if it looks strange. Okay. So this one, we're going to not take the percent. We're going to take the decimal because they already gave me my decimal. I don't have to create one. And you're going to go 2 to the left and then fill it in. 0.0326. Then This one, they did not give me a decimal, so I have to go back to adding my decimal and then going 2 over. It's 3.80%. And then this one, we're going to change this to a decimal and go 2 over 35.36%.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so to change a percent to a decimal, we go to the left. To change a decimal to a percent, you go 2 to the right. Anytime they ask you to fill in 100, but you're at a tenth, just multiply it up by 10 for the denominator and then do the same thing. If they wanted you to make this into 1,000 block, then all you do is change this to 1,000. Let's put it right here so we have more room. So they give you 3/10 and they want you to shade it in on a 1,000 block. You change this to 1,000. How would you change this 10 to 1,000? What would you have to multiply it by?
To 1,000.
Mm-hmm.
You would have to do 10 times, 100. Wait.
And then anything you do to the denominator, you do to the numerator. So this becomes 300 over 1,000. And then you would take this and you would shade in 300 of them.
Okay.
Make sense?
So I just thought of this. I have one more question.
Yeah.
So it was on. I can't really find it right now because it was like this thing for school that I don't have anymore. But it was like it said something about. I can't remember exactly, but I remember I was confused on it. It said like, this is shaded in. What are other ways you can shade it in without changing the amount?
Okay. So suppose we had 100 block and it was 30 over 100 or 0.30. The way you can change it is to simplify it. So we can divide this by 10 and divide this by 10 and it becomes 3/10. So basically you're finding an equivalent fraction. So this is the same thing as this. This is 3 out of 100 and this is 3 out of 10. It's the same fraction. It's just this is now multiplied out by 100.
So they did. Okay. 30 over 100 divided. But for here, let me just do it. 10 over 10. Oh yeah.
So basically what it's like, Lauren, like voting is happening, right? So suppose they say 3 people out of 10 are going to vote for President A. How many would vote if this was a consistent number and everybody voted up like close to this? How many people we could predict would vote if we polled 100 people? It would be about 30 out of 100. What about if we polled 1,000 people? It would be 300 people out of 1,000. What about if we polled 10,000 people? So we can make predictions because we're basically just finding an equivalent fraction. We're saying 3/10 times 10 equals 30 over 100. And then if you multiply that by 10, that's 300 over 1,000. If it's moving the same way and we can count on it remaining the same, then we could predict, well, what about if 100,000 people voted? How many people would likely vote for President A? 30,000. What about 1,000,000? Does that make sense? So that's all they're asking you to do, is to find an equivalent fraction. And you do that by either dividing or multiplying by the same number for both the numerator and the denominator. So for example, if you had the fraction 3/4 and they wanted you to find an equivalent fraction, you would multiply up by 2, you would multiply up by 10. It doesn't matter what you multiply up by, as long as you multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same number.
Okay.
But for dividing, you can't divide something, like suppose you had 4/7. You can't divide it by 2, right? Because 7 divided by 2 doesn't work. So for multiplying, you can use whatever number you want. For dividing, you have to have a number that divides equally into both the numerator and the denominator, because they both move together. You can't divide the numerator by 2 and the denominator by 5. If whatever you multiply the numerator by, you have to do for the same, same number for the denominator. So for example, if I had 5/20, I can either multiply up to get an equivalent fraction, or I could divide down, but I have to have a common number. What's a common number that gets divided into 5 and 20? What could we use?
5 and 20, 40.
No, we're dividing down.
Oh, so 5 divided by 40. Could you do like?
There's only one number we could use for this specific one.
So.
What are the numbers that go into
Oh wait.
5?
20 and. Wait, what goes into 20 and 5?
Yeah. What are the common numbers?
20.
Nope. You cannot
No.
do 5 divided by 20. You could do 20 divided by 20, but remember we have to use the same number for the numerator and the denominator.
You can do.
So you'll see what I did here. I listed the factors of 5 and 20. What numbers divide evenly into 5? What numbers divide evenly into 20? There's only one common number. What is it?
Evenly in 5 is 5.
Yep. So you divide this by 5 and then you divide this by 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1 and 20 divided by 5 is 4.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. We have 3 minutes left. What would you like to, do you have anything else that you need on this video?
I think that's pretty much it. That's all I really had questions